You're watching Mountain Computers.
Hello everybody and welcome to Mountain Computers. In today's video I'm going to be upgrading my gaming, development, and video editing workstation. This system currently has a Ryzen 1700 processor in it, and I'm going to be upgrading to a 3700X, and I'm hoping that that should be a fairly significant upgrade for me, especially in terms of the time that it takes to render up videos. Seems I'm always wanting to have that number decrease, as I think anyone who does video production probably does. I also am hoping to get some improvement in gaming performance, and at the end of the video I'm going to be showing you guys the kind of results that I'm going to be getting out of the configuration that my system is already in, as far as what drives it has and what software it has loaded up on it. The first thing that I need to do, because I am upgrading several components, not just the processor, is to go ahead and just disassemble the old system. And in the near future I'm going to be reusing some of those parts in a new system, which I'm going to be helping one of my friends build so that he can have a gaming PC. Same friend who I built a PC for not too long ago. You can check that video up in one of the corners here. I'll put it there, and in the future there'll be another video too which features some of the old parts here. But why don't we just start off the video by going ahead and getting this machine torn down. Alright, I've got all the parts out of here that I was going to harvest to use in the new system. It's looking a little bit bare in there, but not completely empty. I've gone ahead and put all the stuff that other build is going to use into there, and kept the parts that will be staying. But yes, I think now I'm going to go ahead and put the side panels back onto this system, get it wrapped up in the box there, and let's get moving along with the actual build here. Alright, so now that we've got the old system all out of the way, why don't we go ahead and take a look at all the parts that I'm going to be using in the build. everything here that we need to get started, why don't I begin by going over a couple quick tips with you for building. There's only ever really two tools that you'll really need when you're working on building a system, and one of those things is going to be a Phillips screwdriver, and pretty much everything component-wise in the system can be put together using one of these. And the other thing is either like a pocket knife or some scissors to use for opening up some packaging. Many of you probably notice I'm building on a carpet. I've said this before. I'm not super worried about it, but that said, I take absolutely no responsibility for any circuit death or any otherwise electrical death to anything that you are building yourself based on following the same principles. So ground yourself with a grounding strap if you want to be responsible with your components. In this case, I'm just not being responsible, but yeah, why don't we go ahead and get started with the build. So first off is this Ryzen 3700X processor that I need to take out of its box. So why don't I go ahead and get another angle of that for you guys here. Perfect. We'll just go ahead and lift up the lid on that box. Now there is an air cooler included in here, but I don't really care about that because I'm going to be liquid cooling my system. But here in this little box is the Ryzen 3700X, and if we just go ahead and close up this box, I don't think we need anything else out of there anymore. Here on this board, I'm just going to go ahead and raise up this retention arm, which is going to move the zero insertion force socket back so that you notice how it rocks here. The CPU can be inserted. So next thing is going to be to get this box open, which with one hand might be a task, but we'll see what we can do here. Aha! Not too bad. Alright, it looks like AMD hasn't really changed up their packaging very much from first gen Ryzen, or second gen probably. I guess I never had a second gen chip to check, but yeah, it's basically the same, so I can probably just kind of power through this here. Let's go ahead and get this plastic open without dropping the CPU preferably. Now on the bottom of this CPU are a set of gold-plated contact pins, which are used to make good electrical conductivity with the socket over here. So you want to do your very best to avoid touching those, but you can touch the chip from the sides. I would recommend trying not to touch it on the top if at all possible, because that's going to make it more difficult to cool later unless you clean the top off with some isopropyl alcohol preferably. Here are the aforementioned pins, but on the corner, which is going to be hardest to show you guys without dropping, over here there should be... I've got it wrong. On one of these corners there should be a golden triangle. Maybe they've changed it to a dot, maybe that's what I was seeing. Yeah, that golden dot there. Is it a triangle? It's hard to tell on camera. Anyway, that needs to line up with the triangle that you see here, so that those two pieces are aligned. So then you just take the CPU and line it up here. It should just drop right into place. Easy peasy. Then you just take this arm here and rock it back down, and ta-da, you've installed your CPU. The next thing to do is going to be to install this RAM here, so we're going to want to take and move the clips out on a couple of these RAM slots here, and I'm going to use these two slots because those are probably what's best to use on this board for dual channel configurations, which is what I'm running here. I haven't actually checked the manual, I suppose, but this is by and large the most common configuration for that. So you just take the DIMM, you line it up here on the bottom and on the top so that it sits into the slot correctly. Have I got it? Yes, I have. And then you just press down on each side until the clips are firmly pushed into place and your RAM is seated. And we'll just rinse and repeat for the other DIMM here. Making sure it's lined up again, and then pressing down on each side until you've got the RAM really well seated here. The last time I did one of these builds, I wound up having the system not post the first time because I hadn't gotten one of these DIMMs seated correctly, so I wound up fiddling around with it for quite some time before I figured it out, but I think we're doing okay today here. So the next thing that we're really going to need probably is to get the GPU mounted. So I'm going to go ahead and take this board here and line it up with the edge of the table. And then the next thing is going to be to take and lower that clip. And then the GPU is just going to slide real easy down into place here. If I can manage to get the edge of the card off the table. There we go. Alright, that is in place. And I guess the last thing before we go ahead and do a test is going to be to hook up the power supply. So let's go ahead, take the power supply here and start hooking up some cables. So let's go ahead and start with motherboard power here. So this board uses an edge connector for motherboard power, and that is just right over here. Try and get that lined up. This is not going to be a one-handed process, so I'm going to set the camera down, but there we go. Okay. Alright. So there we go. Next, this motherboard has 2 CPU power connectors. That's really not necessary, but I do have the connectors on my power supply, so I'm going to go ahead and hook them up, I guess. Not an issue for me, I guess. You should very easily be able to get away with connecting only one of these CPU power connectors and not having an issue. Let's see, what am I doing wrong here? There we go. There is one connector in place. And let's go ahead and connect up the other one. And then lastly, let's get the GPU power hooked up. And just like that, we have got a system that is ready to post up. I'm not going to put a cooler on the CPU. It should be fine just to do a post test. Doing a post test on this board should be rather easy. There is an integrated power button, but before we give that a go, let me go get a monitor to bring over here so we can actually see that the system has appropriately booted once it has. Alright, so if this is successful, when I hit the power button, we should see the GPU fans start going here. We should see the RGB lights on the board here light up, and eventually we should also see this monitor here start having a display on it. So let's go ahead and flip the power supply on, and then let's use the power button here to see what we can. That's a good sign. The RAM already started to glow even before I hit the power button. There's some post codes going. No RGB lights on the board, but we do have this orange light, and the graphics card lights are on, and fans are spinning. There's the lights on the board. I don't know if you... There they are again. And then let's see if the monitor decides to do anything here. I'm not going to cut this, just so you guys have an idea of about how long this takes. As far as I'm aware, Ryzen does take some time to train its memory to see what kind of timings it can get when it boots up in a new configuration every time. So it does take some time before it will boot into the BIOS. Nothing different has really happened here on the board. It's still glowing, but there we go. And as you can see, we booted into the UEFI here. So successful first boot test. Let's go ahead and start tossing all of this stuff into the case and getting drives hooked up too. Alright, so here is the Fractal Design Define S2. The case which I will be building in. This is the blackout edition, which means that the PCI Express inserts and the fan blades are done in black instead of white. Not much more to say, I don't think. Let's go ahead and start getting the side panels off. Now, for quite a while, I have been using Fractal Design cases, and I guess I have a bit of a weakness for them. Because no matter how much I feel going into a build, like I want to try to use something else, inevitably it seems like I wind up coming back to one of their cases. The only other company who I've used in one of my personal builds cases on a main build is Corsair, but that was fairly early on when I didn't have a whole lot of money. Not that Corsair's cases are necessarily bad, it just seems like they don't tend to fit my needs and my taste as much. So on this side is the tempered glass panel, which comes with the Define S2. I think that's a standard feature. But I'm going to have to be a little bit careful with it, considering that it is glass, after all. Alright, there we go. Now, the real fun begins. So, before I start putting everything into the case, I figured I better get these M2 drives hooked up in this motherboard. Now, the M.2 slots are underneath of this big heatsink here, and that's used to not just cool these M.2 drives slots, but also to passively cool the X570 chipset on this board. It's one of the few, if not the only board that I know of that actually passively cools the chipset for X570. If you're interested in knowing more about this board, though, you can check out my video that I posted not too long ago, specifically going over the contents of everything on this board and what comes with it too, in the video up here or here, you know, wherever they put those things. So the accessories for this case come in one of the 3.5-inch drive bays back here, and all you have to do to get at them is unscrew the mounting bracket for that drive bay here. You should be able to just pull this out of here. I haven't worked with this case, but if it's like any of the other Fractal Design cases, I should be able to just pull this out now. It's stuck on something. Oh, just a little sticky. Alright, there we go. And here is where all of the screws and things are. So, because there is so little room here along the right side of this board to be used in this case, I am going to go ahead and hook up some of the edge connectors along here right now before I get this screwed down. That way I should be able to actually get them to fit in there instead of being completely impossible to plug in. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Alright, a little tough here, but it looks like I've got all of these routed around here in such a way that they're going to work. So the next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is just screw in this board. Alright, so now that I've got all of the motherboard screws in place, I think the next thing that I'm going to work on is getting the front panel I/O connectors hooked up. So Aorus with this board includes one of these handy intermediary connectors that you can use to hook up the front panel I/O in a little bit more clean way, and one that doesn't take nearly as much fiddling as what other solutions that attach directly to the board typically would do. And then this connects to this, which then in turn connects through this little bitty connector here to the actual board itself. So I'm just going to hook that up now, and that's going to be the front panel I/O done. Real simple. Alright, so the front panel I/O is all connected up here. The next thing that I'm going to go ahead and do is install this fan hub that Aorus includes in the box with this motherboard. Now, some of you may be wondering why in the heck I would be doing that when there is an integrated fan hub in the case here, which I could be using instead. And the thing with that is that this is not just a fan hub, it also happens to be a USB hub for two front panel USB connectors that only takes in one USB connector that comes off of the board from right here where it says USB 2, and there's only one of those USB 2 connections, and yet I am going to need two USB connections internally in the system, one for my liquid cooler for Corsair's iCUE, and one for the actual front panel USB 2.0 connections. So I'm kind of forced to use this, and maybe I'll try and figure out a way to take out the other fan hub and use this instead, maybe? That might not be a bad idea, actually. So I'm going to look into getting this thing put in, and then I will get back with you guys. I've got this other fan hub put in here, and it is magnetic, and I just went ahead and unscrewed the old fan hub from up here and magnetically mounted this here. It doesn't hold on in this case particularly well, and there's not a lot of good places to mount it, really, since I have to reserve these spaces for drives, or at least I am going to be putting one drive in here. But yeah, so I do have the front panel hooked up here, though, and I'm going to worry a little bit more about cable management here in a bit, because this is already starting to get a little bit messy, but I'm going to try and kind of cable manage as I go, and when I don't feel like it, I'm gonna go back and fix it later. But now that I have this in here, and I've got this USB connection ready to go, I think I'm going to go ahead and start prepping the liquid cooler so that I can get ready to put it into the system. Alright, I've got this block all put onto the board here. Fans are all on, radiator's hooked up, and all of the cabling is done for this block as well. The last thing I have to do really is just to take this plastic off of here, and I think I'm going to save that for a moment at the end of the video, partially so that I can get the peeling into a montage, and partially just because I don't want to smudge anything on here until I don't have to touch it anymore. So yeah, that said, the next thing I think I'm gonna go for is probably putting the drives in. I'll take a look at what I've got and get back to you guys. You know what? On second thought, I think I'm going to go ahead and install the power supply now. Since it's a fully modular power supply, it shouldn't be a whole lot of trouble for me to get it in here now and just kind of start hooking up some of the cables that I can. It's got one of these detachable mounting brackets back here for the power supply that makes it pretty easy to put in, so I'm definitely going to go ahead and utilize that. But yeah, I'll get to it and I'll get back to you guys in a minute. Alright, I've got the power supply put in here in the system. I don't have it screwed in yet because I'm still attaching cables, but I've went ahead and attached some of the cables for the components that are already in here, and I have gone ahead and hooked them up. And as you can see, this back panel is looking worse than ever, so I'm definitely going to have to go back and cable manage this in a bit, but I think now is the time at which I'm going to go ahead and start putting some drives in the system, so I'll get back to you guys once I have that ready. Alright, I've got my two drives in here, so I think the next thing that I'm going to go ahead and do is get the power supply cables hooked up for those, and then just kind of start doing some cable management to get some of these wires cleaned up. So I'll be back with you guys in probably a little while. Just wanted to say real quick that I almost forgot to install the front panel audio header, which is down here in the lower left corner of the board. They've got a pretty nice cutout for hooking that up here on this case, but I did not forget to hook it up, and it is installed right here. Alright, so moving along then. Alright, well, I've got a bunch of the cables managed. They're definitely not falling right out of the case anymore. They're not in the neatest of order, but they do look fairly nice from the front. I'll go around there in a second. But I did also go ahead and install some temperature probes that you can plug into this fan hub, and a sound sensor that plugs into the motherboard too. And I have one of the temperature probes and one of the and the one and only sound probes tucked down here under the basement. And then I've got another one of those temperature probes just kind of run up here by the radiator, so I can have that in as a temperature, I guess. Not sure how useful the ladder's going to be at helping me figure out how fast any of the fans should run, but we'll see, I guess. I'll have to see just kind of what temperatures I'm seeing in the case, and I'll try to adjust the fan speeds appropriately for whatever they need to be. But if we come around here on the other side and I turn on the light, you should be able to get a
fairly good idea that the cables from this side are looking pretty good, I would say. The best that I'm going to be able to do anyway. So the next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is install the graphics card, and that is going to be the last component going in, I think. Alright, I'm going to get to it. Alright, I've got the GPU in there and it's all hooked up, so I guess now basically the last things to do are going to be to get some glam shots here and then test it out and see how it works.
Alright, moving into the benchmarking part of the video here, starting with Cinebench Revision 20, you can see there's some pretty good improvements in performance all around. And then moving into Unigen's Heaven benchmark, there's some pretty nice improvements in the minimum frame rates here, a little bit of a boost on the average, but not too much. In Valley, you'll see some of the same kind of minimum frame rate improvements, and the average going up fairly similar percentage amount as before. Doing a video render here,
I got some marginal but definitely noticeable performance improvements in render times, and overall it looks like if you were going to buy a new processor right now, the way to go would be to, if you're just looking for performance per dollar, still go with the 1700, but get it on eBay for the price that I found it for, which was around $150. And if you can't find it for that on there, and you wind up having to go buy a new one from some place like B&H, which was the cheapest that I could find it for, new on PC Part Picker, all the way up at $310, just don't even bother. It's not a very good value at that price point. You can see at the proportional section of this graph here that is actually the least best deal out of these three configurations that you could go for, and that you should definitely wind up going for a 3700X. That said, X570 boards are a fair bit more expensive than what you would go with for one of the older processors like a B450 or a B350. But as long as you can verify that you can get one of those older boards, most of them are still compatible. Get one of those that is compatible with a newer chip, and make sure that you have a means to get the current working BIOS on it. Then I think that is also a spectacular way to go. But if you are looking for the best performance between the two, hands down, go for the 3700X. In gaming, it makes a noticeable improvement in minimum frame rates too. The stutters are quite a bit less jarring when they do happen. So, yeah. Alright guys, so the making of this video has taken me maybe about a week to do, so if you did enjoy it, then please consider hitting the like button, and if you want to catch some of my future videos, then go ahead and hit subscribe. But overall, the system that I've built here has been working pretty great for me. You know, as indicated by the benchmarks, it's performing pretty well compared to the old system, especially bringing up those minimum frame rates in games. That's been pretty nice. I haven't actually rendered out a video yet in long format to see if that helps spectacularly much there, but I do count on it being a fairly nice performance improvement overall. So yeah, that said, I think I'm gonna wrap it up for this one, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye!